Welcome to Generations. This is Kevin Swanson. And today, shall we jettison social conservatism in favor of fiscal conservatism in the matters of the state? That's the question. Given that the social issue has lost traction in the states and, of course, the federal government, we all know that. It's the pro-life, the LGBTQ issue is off the table for the Republican National Convention. Well, I live in a liberal state, and 20 years ago, I met with the family guy out here in Colorado, the lobbyist for the Family Research Council. And we were talking, and we went through the agenda of family issues. And I said, what about the pro-life issue? He said, oh, pro-life issues, zero traction in this state. To which I said, who cares? It's the issue of the day. Well, so it went. And my understanding is the Family Research Council is now no longer in the state of Colorado. Well, the Trump administration has also recently defended the abortion pill in 2 legal cases so far, the last of which was 3 weeks ago regarding the Louisiana case. 60 lawmakers, though, 20 senators and 40 reps, have filed an amicus brief in Louisiana's lawsuit against the FDA regarding abortion pill regulations. They're opposing the Kill Pill by Mail program, in which hired killers get across state lines, send abortion pills into states like Louisiana and Texas to kill babies in their mother's wombs. The lawmakers are calling out the FDA for violating the Comstock Act when it, under the Biden administration, eroded safeguards on mifepristone, quote unquote, allowing it to be sent by mail. The Comstock Act bans the mailing of anything intended for use in an abortion for any sort of across state lines or within states. Now, so far, no progress on abortion in Donald Trump's first year as president. The monthly average number of abortions steadily increased from 79,620 in 2022 to 88,180 abortions in 2023 to 95,250 abortions per month in 2024 and 98,630 per month in 2025. So far, so bad in terms of quantities of abortions in America per month. Fiscal or economic conservatism and the reining in of big government spending may come easier to a covetous people, where the rich would rather not be subjected to heavy taxation and provide campaign donations to politicians likely to reduce taxes. However, government reforms touching social issues are not quite so popular among a chronically sinful populace. Any mention of biblical law relating to sexual crimes or the killing of unborn children would be quickly and soundly anathematized by church leaders, university professors, media personalities, politicians alike. Americans who believe abortion should be legal in most or all cases has increased radically since 2019, from 54% to now 63%. That's an unprecedented 9% increase in just, 5 or 6 years. 63% of American women now call themselves pro-abortion, up from 45% in 2012. Still about 45% of men still call themselves pro-abortion. That's held steady for about 15 years. The only sexual crime concerning which a few politicians might dare to address in the social issue category is that crime committed against children, ergo pedophilia. Prime example of this: Alabama's Governor Kay Ivey just signed the Child Predator Death Penalty Act into law early in 2026 this year. This law rightly assigned the death penalty to crimes of first-degree rape, first-degree sodomy, and first-degree sexual assault of victims under age 12. Now, biblical law actually does have something on seizing a person against their will or kidnapping them, and that's pretty serious penalty. Exodus 21:16, anyone who kidnaps someone, whether he sells him or he is found in his possession, shall certainly be put to death. Now, conservatives tend to fold on social issues more than they would fold on fiscal issues, but they really do fold on both. Conservatives don't like funding transgender surgeries, but they tolerate the promotion of homosexuality at the highest echelons of government still, and nobody wants to reverse Obergefell. You can count on that. But why? Here's the reason. It takes faith to stand against the enemy, especially in politics. And almost none of the Republicans have faith in God. It's a people in whom there is no faith. Deuteronomy 32, the Lord said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end will be, for they are a perverse generation, a children in whom is no faith. So does fiscal or economic conservatism really materialize anyway? As I've said before, a conservative walks into a restaurant, orders a little less than whatever that liberal is having over there, and the cook always gives him more. And this just in, President Donald Trump has approved another $3 billion to the international organization, the United Nations, in early February. The U.S. has averaged $2.5 billion of funding each year for the UN over the last 20 years. So the $3 billion approved by Donald Trump represents an increase over the average. So much for all the campaign rhetoric about cutting fundings to international governments. Despite vowing to close down the U.S. Department of Education during his campaign, the President of the United States has just signed a government funding bill that will jack up the Education Department funding from 2025 levels by $217 million, now at $79 billion. That's $12 billion more than the administration's original request. It went right back up. As well, the National Institutes of Health gets another increase of $415 million over fiscal year 2025, now $48.7 billion to keep that bureaucracy alive and flourishing. So thanks a lot, President Trump. If you were to pick a political hill to die on, it would have to be abortion and education. But nobody's dying on these hills this time of year. So far this fiscal year, the deficit is running $700 billion for the first month. The U.S. federal deficit, $700 billion over the first 4 months of this fiscal year, topping Biden's 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024 deficits at this time of the year. Donald Trump is a big spender, a bigger spender, a bigger debtor than Joe Biden so far this year. Hey, thanks a lot, President Trump. All to prove the point, Republicans prefer fiscal conservatism over social conservatism. Actually not. Conservatives are typically more liberal on spending than liberals. The average deficit to GDP ratios under the last Democrat administrations was 3.7%. The average deficit to GDP ratios under the last 3 Republican administrations was 4.6%. Now, question, is 4.6% higher than 3.7%? Basic math here. Yes, 4.6% is higher than 3.7%. We don't find presidents vetoing budgets, forcing a 2/3 majority override. Why? Because Republicans are big spenders. Now, am I turning into a cynic here? Why do conservatives have to fold like a cheap suit when push comes to shove, when it comes down to something that really matters? Well, that's the question today, and Bill Jack from Worldview Academy joins me on this edition. The subject, fiscal conservatism or social conservatism. Which direction shall we go? Bill, am I turning into a cynic or what? What's going on with me?
You know what, Kevin?
What's happening with me? I mean, I ran for governor of Colorado as a social conservative and an economic conservative. I'm for both, but I'm just looking for somebody who'll just do something in the area of conservatism, or the word itself is problematic, but will do something for the cause of righteousness and liberty as defined by God's law. Is that fair to say?
You just can't take a joke is what it is.
What do you mean? So most conservatives just a joke. It's a joke. We're not making progress, is my point. We're not making progress with the debt to GDP. That's obvious. We're doing worse on the deficit to GDP in the first 4 to 5 months of this fiscal year than Biden did in 21, 22, 23, and 24. So any questions? Does that surprise you that somehow we're, and again, the current administration says we're fiscal conservatives, but we're just not going to touch the social issues as much. We're just not going to go there right now. We're going to stick to fiscal issues. Well, I'm looking at fiscal issues. I'm saying, now, wait a minute. You guys still aren't doing well. F- so far. And whatever happened to this Doge thing? Do you remember Doge?
Right.
Can you remember that far back?
Disappeared, didn't it?
Yeah, whatever happened to Doge? I thought we were saving money. We're still spending like drunken sailors face down in ditches. That's where we are right now. We are drunken sailors, spending like drunken sailors, face down in the ditch. And so far, so bad for the Trump administration when it comes to fiscal conservatives. Now, if someone's going to step up and say, we're not fiscal conservatives, we don't want to stop abortion. We have no issue with abortion, the kill pill, my mail program. We like homosexuality. We want to appoint as many homosexuals to top offices in American governance as possible. And no way do we ever want to reverse Obergefell. Now, if they stepped up and said, we just like to be liberal, then I would say, okay, you're voting for liberals, but I think they're presenting themselves. Aren't they trying to present themselves as some kind of fiscal conservative?
It's the old Wizard of Oz line, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. There's no substance behind the wizardry of conservative government. It's all smoke and mirrors.
And I think a lot of people thought, well, Donald Trump is not establishment conservative. I mean, I think people were thinking that. And they thought, well, Donald Trump, certainly, he's not a big spender and he doesn't believe in debt. He's never himself ever been in debt before. And he's never driven his own businesses into bankruptcy. So that's never happened. He's probably one of the most responsible people that we could ever put into government. I think people have some of those impressions.
Well, I think they have the impression that he has kept promises that he's made in the past.
He has.
And he's made a promise to dismantle the Department of Education to get us out of the UN, but he has not done so.
But he hasn't done so.
Right.
And the Department of Education, it was supposed to be cut.
Right.
Significantly. I think $12 billion, where we're back up into $79 billion territory, which is pretty much where it's been under Biden, under Obama, and all the others. Are we doing anything to cut government or pull the federal government out of education?
So here's how it works.
I mean, are there people going, I think I just got ripped off on my vote back in 2024?
Here's how it works. You know, say it's $79 billion that was their budget. They put in a request for $100 billion for this coming year. Mm-hmm. And the president says, no, I'm only going to give you, 83. Mm-hmm. Well, that's still an increase.
That's still an increase. It wasn't quite as much of the increase as the other guys wanted.
It is a cut from what they wanted. So it's semantic mysticism. It is a word game.
Now, let's talk about the social conservatism versus fiscal conservatives. Now, is my argument that we're not really getting either one. We're walking into restaurants and we're saying, hey, I want a little less than whatever the liberal is having over there, and the cook always gives you more. So that's what happens in American government. Done. Okay. But now, social conservatism, okay, we're not going to pay any attention to the abortion issue, not going to pay any attention to, whatever kind of sexuality you want to do and however you want to teach 12-year-olds to do that. As long as you do it with your own money. I think that's the libertarian view of this. Libertarians interpret liberty without reference to God and his law. This is from my next book coming out. According to this view, people should be free to sin as long as they don't harm others by their actions, as in the case of abortion. Abortion doesn't hurt anybody else. And sexual perversion and pornography doesn't hurt anybody, as long as consenting adults are engaging in these activities. To which you would say what?
That there's always a victim to every sin, to every crime.
I guess that one of the questions would be, how do you know?
Right.
How do you know? How do you know these are victimless crimes? I guess that, but you would say there are victims.
There are victims.
And you would say that on good authority.
Yes. So if I willingly consent to having sex with a prostitute, but I contract a sexually transmitted disease and bring it home to my family, then it does have an effect.
It's going to spread a bit. So there are social effects. There are social effects.
There are social effects
impossible
to every sin.
Right.
And here's the problem with libertarians. There are Christians who claim a libertarian perspective. They claim it fiscally, that they're fiscal libertarians. And I can identify with that. The problem with libertarian positions, however, is that they do not understand the purpose of government or the need for government based on their lack of understanding of the nature of man. They interpret that people are basically good rather than basically flawed, sinful, and thus in need of a restraining force in society to keep evil down, to punish evil, because they cannot really define evil either. So they have a bad view of the nature of man, a distorted view of what is evil and how to define what is evil, because then ultimately they have a distorted view of the nature of God.
Here's another way I put it in my new book, Under God, coming out in just a few weeks. And I'm going to piggyback on what you just said. I wrote, the problem with the libertarian position is that these sinful activities, as in killing your kids, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, prostitution, etc., and drugs, they destroy the character of the nation and create more chaos. Society becomes unmanageable, fathers abdicate, the family disintegrates, and more tyranny steps in to save the day. So this is typically what happens. Libertarians misread human nature. When social anarchy or rebellion against God at an individual level sets into a society, tyranny or rebellion against God at a social level compensates. Tyranny plays off on anarchy. Neither provides for a stable nation, but inevitably, tyranny dominates. Both are forms of autonomy or human rebellion against God and his law. The term liberal, and this is where I find that libertarians and liberals actually cross paths at one point, and this is interesting. The term liberal may very well be the most misused word in the present day. Libertarians define liberty as a socially accepted license to engage in immoral activity, but what they may not realize is that this itself encourages the vice of the people and signs them up to more tyranny at the hands of slave masters and the draconian state. Similarly, most modern liberals and socialists also advocate for policies that encourage immorality for the purposes of, and I think they actually think this way, libertarians don't think this way, but this is the way liberals and socialists think, for the purposes of enslaving the people and aggrandizing more big government. In other words, they demoralize the people in order to tyrannize them. First, they legalize, fund, and otherwise encourage sexual perversion, killing babies for convenience, gambling, drug use, and other assorted immoralities. But to address the social problems they created in their efforts to demoralize the citizenry, these liberals promptly increase taxes, take over education, child welfare, regulate every aspect of private business and private property. They understand well that a demoralized populace is easily controlled. A demoralized populace will always favor security over liberty. So you see, the libertarians and the liberals sort of are accomplished in the same agenda here. Do you notice that, Bill?
Right.
Very interesting how that works.
And it goes back to government is the solution. Either less government or more government. They see it as the solution rather than that government is a minister of God. And God is the solution. He establishes government for a purpose based on the nature of man and his character of justice, which says this is right and this is wrong. When we don't meet God's definitions, when we don't acknowledge God's definitions of what is right, what is wrong, what is evil, what is true, what is beautiful, then we distort everything, and therefore all of our systems get out of whack. We begin to start with man's reason rather than beginning with God's revelation.
And based on God's revelation, based on God's law, some government involvement in social issues is apropos. And you would say that. In other words,
right.
Governments do have a role in punishing guys who engage in homosexual sodomy acts upon a 10-year-old boy, for example. Now, I know that's grotesque. We're talking about grotesque things here. But Alabama's governor signed a bill that would up the ante on the punishment that would come upon those engaged in serious acts of pedophilia, or I would say child sexual abuse. And
right.
and again, my position on that is good riddance. Good riddance. We need some decent laws. It's probably the only opportunity left for any kind of reining in of the killing of babies, the killing of or the molestation of 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds by homosexuals or others. And you know, kudos to Governor Kay Ivey, who signed the Child Predator Death Penalty Act into law just last week. Now, it turns out that Governments have been involved in social issues all the way back to the Comstock laws of the 1860s, 1870s. Now, let me give you some history. This comes from America in God's Providence. I encourage all Christian families to have copies of this 2-volume, beautiful, 4-color, glossy page, 1,000-page presentation of American Christian history over the last 400 years, especially on this 250th anniversary of the American Republic. So here's what happened in 1868. This is very interesting how this all developed. Young Anthony Comstock in 1868 was dismayed because he came upon a friend who had been ruined by the terrible vice of pornography. Not the first time that's happened, Bill.
Right.
But because photography had just been developed, they were starting to, find this vice as developing in America, as well as abortion. Abortion had come to America by Madame Restell and others. And so Comstock got involved in this kind of thing. He began a crusade. Comstock took immediate action. He found the source of the obscene books, secured the help of a police officer, and had the man arrested. Okay. At 24 years of age, Comstock began a crusade against the burgeoning obscenity industry in New York City. When a corrupt police officer refused to arrest a purveyor, Comstock had the officer fired from his position. In the space of one day in March 1872, he coordinated 7 separate arrests. Comstock worked hard to get a bill through Congress. This is the Comstock Act, prohibiting the importation of obscene material into the United States and transmittal of it through the U.S. Post Office. The Postal Office was the major means of conveying printed material around the nation at the time. The U.S. Senate approved the bill on March 3rd, 1873. Comstock was hired as Postmaster General to prosecute offenders and stayed on task for about 40 years. By the end of his career, Anthony Comstock had confiscated and destroyed 4 million pictures and over 28,000 pounds of stereotype plates, et cetera, et cetera. But he also included in the bill forbidding the sale and the transfer of abortifacients. That is, chemicals by which women would kill their babies. So that was included in the Comstock Acts of the 1870s. So that's the history of Anthony Comstock. And believe it or not, the Comstock Acts of the 1870s have not yet been reversed by the American legislature, by the United States legislature or judiciary, either way, right? So is there historical precedent for limiting the access to pornography, to different forms of pornography, as well as drugs, the sale of drugs across state lines through the U.S. Post Office, et cetera, as well as the shipping of abortifacients and the kill pill by mail program across state lines to the state of Louisiana and Texas. Now, at this point, the Trump administration is fighting these laws, and they are backing the kill pill by mail program thus far.
On what basis? What do they say is the reason that there's
more studies? More studies. They're not interested in what the kill pill does to babies.
No.
They're interested in whether the kill pill has resulted in some sort of health defects or health issues for the mamas that take it. So that's what the FDA is looking at right now.
There was a case before the Supreme Court that was dismissed because they didn't have standing. If I'm correct.
That was way back in June of last year.
Yes, but it
the
showed
Louisiana
that there
law
was at least 11% of those who received this pill had damage.
Yeah. There are these statistics, and they're playing around with the statistics, and I think we're going to get some position by the FDA over the next, say, 4 to 6 months. But for the time being, there's no real interest in the Comstock laws. There's no real interest in what the kill pill does for babies. And that's my concern, Bill. They're okay with the administration of the kill pill. They just approved another kill pill, right. Another brand of kill pill. That is the Trump administration. FDA has approved another version of the kill pill for the use of killing babies in the United States of America as of about 4 to 5 months ago. So so far, so bad for any kind of substantial move to protect life in the United States of America. And somebody's going to have to get out there and by faith take a position on these domestic social issues. And I haven't seen it yet, Bill. I haven't seen it yet.
Right. You know, Scripture says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. I'm reminded of a recent February 10th article in The American Thinker by Scott Powell, Defeating the Deep State's Inversion Matrix. And he talks about this very thing, about how what's happened is they've called good evil and evil good. And it started in the churches. There was a slide in the church, and then it made its way into the culture. And that this is Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values in Western civilization are under attack. And he says, quote, demonic forces are real. And that is what you get when you drive the true God out of the culture, end quote. That's what we're seeing here. Yeah. These are all symptoms of a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is that we have relegated big G God to a small g God and put him over on the shelf to be pulled off once a week and maybe opened and read a verse and then put it back on the shelf. Stay over there, God. Don't get involved over here.
And let's not bring it into politics. Let's not take it into Washington.
We see that with candidates. Here in Colorado, we're in a gubernatorial race, and on the Republican side, I've heard candidates we have several candidates here running before the primary, and there are candidates who recognize and bring up very clearly it's a spiritual battle, and then there are those who say we just need to focus on the fiscal issues. We just need to focus on those 80-20 issues that are not social issues, that are not moral issues. We just need to talk about housing affordability and safety. Well, yes, those are eventually, they rest upon a spiritual base as to how you view those things. But there are people who are conservative who are at odds with each other because they say, keep God out of politics. And we've got to realize this is a spiritual battle. It begins with your view of the nature of God, the nature of man, and how you're going to form government in order to hold up the liberty of the individual and the value of the individual, and yet maintain order.
I still believe that progress may be made in some state or nation around the world to this day. And this is the way I wrap up one of my chapters in Under God, soon to come out, because I don't want people to give up hope. I'm just saying, at this point, we're not making progress with the U.S. fiscal policy and the U.S. social policies. Okay, we're not making progress there, but I still hold out some hope that there are some godly leaders with faith who could make a difference. And that's effectively the message of my new book, Under God. So here are some metrics. Christian political leadership in any given state or country can look for progress in the following areas. And I want to end on this one. Number one, an overall reduction of abortion rates and an improvement in birth rate for a particular country or state. Number two, an overall reduction in government spending on all abortion, abortifacients, macabre science, fetal tissue research, promotion of sexual perversion, and the like. 3, an overall reduction in government spending as a percentage of the GNP, the gross national product, and a reduction of the deficit as a percentage of the GNP, and a reduction of the debt as a percentage of the GNP. So if we start to see any of this, progress. Number 4, an overall decentralization of national control of education, healthcare, welfare, drug enforcement, labor and employment, land ownership, environmental regulation, transportation, and infrastructure. Any kind of decentralization would be a good sign. Number 5, an overall reduction of all government spending on education, healthcare, welfare, labor and employment, land ownership, and environmental regulation. Number 6, an overall reduction of government corruption, government bribery, red tape, in order to encourage honest trade in entrepreneurism among business leaders in a nation or state. Number 7, an overall reduction of government licensing, zoning, and regulating private businesses and privately owned property. Number 8, an overall improvement in criminal prosecution of business crime where fraud, embezzlement, insider trading, and other forms of cheating are penalized. Number 9, an overall improvement in criminal prosecution of all theft, burglary, and violent crime. Women and children should be able to walk the streets at night without fear of assaults and muggings. And number 10, an overall improvement in personal liberties for individuals and families in education, gun ownership, health care, food choices, freedom of speech, and privacy. Now, friends, any and all substantive change in a nation will only be brought about by the simultaneous reformation of family, church, and state. Godly leaders will form out of godly reforming families and godly reforming churches. At the end of the day, the key catalyst for any reformation of a city, a province, or nation will be this very thing, the emergence of godly leadership in that state. And that wraps up one of my chapters on godly leadership in my new book coming out soon. It's called Under God.
Now,
Any comments real quick?
Kevin, people will hear you say that and they say, well, that sounds like common sense. That sounds reasonable, okay? And we would expect that. Here's the problem with people saying, well, that's just a return to common sense. The problem with common sense is you have to have something in common. And until our people repent and return to a biblical view of family, of government, a biblical view of church, we will not have what is necessary to bring about that common sense.
Yeah.
So what we're calling for, as always, is a revival, and which would result in the restoration of the rule of law in our country.
And a reforming
Yes.
of all of life.
Yeah.
Family, church, and state, and the whole shooting match. Okay. Well, friends, as we wrap this up, let me encourage you to the history of the United States and just the fact that it's been done before. The experiment worked one other time before. Check out this great experiment on the 250th anniversary of the United States of America since this nation was formed in 1776. 250 years ago. Count them, Bill. All right. So get a copy of America in God's Providence, our 2-volume series on the American Christian heritage for this country. It's called America in God's Providence, and you'll find it at generations.org. This is Kevin Swanson and Bill Jack inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.